Good afternoon and welcome, or good morning, and if you're in the US, and welcome everyone to the 5th edition of RES Forum Live. My name is Andy Piagentini of the RES Forum, and I'm pleased to be hosting today with Liz Portala, Senior Director, Sterling Lexicon, and President of NERA, the New England Relocation Association. You'll hear from Liz shortly. Quick note, in response to feedback, we've changed our format somewhat compared to previous RES Live events to allow more time with our experienced panellists, who we'll also hear from shortly. We're pleased to offer you the chance to put your comments and questions directly via the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screens, so please do get involved. As a secondary point, we won't have breakouts today, but we will be focusing on panel time, asking the panellists questions, and also through the Zoom functionality, picking out your questions and asking those to the panellists. We believe that will work very effectively. With today's event, as always, we aim to share insights gleaned from the last few crazy months. And also being true to RES Forum, we aim to draw from each other the confidence that we're not facing these common challenges alone. And further, to go beyond COVID, we will explore some of the other challenges and pressures being placed upon the GM world. The main question that we'd like to explore today is this: how do you, GM professionals, prioritise GM objectives when HR budgets are tight? And we can also add some sub-questions to that. So how do you defend and maintain the position or the argument for continued cross-border working and next generation international leadership development in this context of tight budgets? And as a final question as part of this theme, how can organisations continue to afford to invest both in international as well as local and regional issues, given the cost pressures that have happened over the last few months? Put differently, how can we make the voice for GM be heard versus other HR initiatives? Our latest research published earlier this week shows that we are seeing an enormous amount of creative thinking being poured into new employment constructs for cross-border working. And the question remains, are such working practices here to stay? And have we, or indeed have we, seen the end of the traditional assignment? And if so, where can employers show flexibility in our value proposition to continue to position themselves as attractive employers and subsequently attract and retain the candidate profiles they need so much to succeed? With budget types, what will fall by the wayside? All ideas today are very much welcome. So let's try and challenge each other through the course of the next 40 minutes or so. Questions and counter questions from our panel are most welcome. Before we go to the panel though, we'd like to pull up a quick check-in poll. You should see on your screen. Now, the poll asks, what will your primary focus for GM be in the next 6 to 12 months? And we have 5 answers. Number 1, immigration and tax changes. Number 2, talent, workforce deployment and management. Number 3, diversity and cultural dexterity. Number 4, employee wellbeing and safety. Or number 5, budget workforce reallocations. So please vote right now and we'll discuss your answers in a second. Okay, Ken, I think we're ready to see the answers. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in Liz Portala from Sterling Lexicon, my co-host today, and I'm going to ask her, put her on the spot and ask her immediate thoughts on those answers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andy. Well, no surprise around the immigration and tax result here. And actually for me, I've been reading so much about diversity and cultural dexterity really falling off as a priority, and this actually kind of speaks to that. What is surprising here is that we had 0% around budget and workforce reallocations. So as we go through the day today, it will be interesting to hear from our panelists as well as questions that are posed to talk through these in a little bit more detail. I actually thought it would be more about talent and workforce deployment as the number one answer. So it's interesting to see that there is continued interest in immigration and immigration and tax changes.
Yep. Yeah, very interesting, and I'm sure our panel members will have some views on that. So moving ahead, joining us today, we are excited to have an expert group of panel members. And before we introduce the panel and ask them the key questions of the day, I thought I would share with you what I see as some interesting views in the current context. So, as Liz mentioned, based on recent articles and research, I'm drawn to an article that I read, I think it was the Financial Times in late 2020. And it asked, will workforce diversity initiatives survive in a post-COVID era? So, exactly to the spot survey answers that our members gave. But what it led me to ask is, what else will be removed, bumped off, or fall down the HR agenda? And is there still a case to be made for diverse, internationally minded next generation leadership? Leadership developed through international assignments and international posting? Or should local initiatives, local initiatives linked to local costs take the priority? I also recall from a McKinsey report in May this year that they reported that 27% of organisations had put most or all diversity initiatives on hold. And yet, conversely, Maxine Williams, global CDO of Facebook, said that allyship across employee communities worldwide has never been more important to counter rising xenophobia. So we have these very interesting natural tensions and companies being forced to choose, if you have to put your dollars in one place, where do you do it? So at this stage, I'll pause and I'm going to pass over to my co-host Liz, who's going to introduce herself and talk about our exciting panel for the day.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andy. And I know many of you today. It's nice to see your faces. I am excited to introduce the panel, but before I do, just a little bit on me. I'm with Sterling Lexicon. I've been with Sterling Lexicon for about 3 years, but really in the global mobility space for over 30. I like to tell people that I started when I was 8. I've had the luxury of sitting on the corporate side of the house as well as the RMC side, and have spent many years coaching companies and consulting with companies around their policy and program frameworks, future states, and then the measurement of the programs that were executed. So that's just a little about me, but I am excited really today to, my main job here is to introduce our great panel, our diverse panel that is joining us. I'd like to begin with Lindsay Hare. Lindsay is one of the original 8 Res Forum members, most recently as functional lead for global mobility for a major international bank. Welcome, Lindsay. Next, I'd like to introduce Kathy Thompson. Kathy is head of global mobility at Citibank in New York. Following Kathy, Mike Clark is manager of international mobility and immigration global mobility services at Boeing. And Mike is based in St. Louis. Following Mike, we have Sonia Wallace. Welcome, Sonia. Sonia is diversity and inclusion specialist at EY in Cincinnati. And last but not least, we have Patricia Marks, who's chairman of the board, New World Van Lines, based in Chicago. Welcome, everybody. The ask of you attendees is that as you hear the discussion, please pose any questions you have on the Zoom discussion or chat log, and Ken, Andy, or myself will gather up those questions for posting to the panel. And we would love for you to feel free to let us know if you want to direct any of those questions to a specific panelist. So with that, I'd like to get started with our first question, which I'm going to pose to Kathy, which is, how has your organization responded to the need for more flexibility, for example, in terms of requests for cross-border remote work? And thank you, Kathy.
Sure, thanks, Liz. And I'm very happy to be here on the panel. And so thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to give you just level set a little bit around Citi. You may know us as Citibank or Citigroup, or you may not know us. But we are headquartered in New York, and something you may not know is that we've been around for more than 200 years. It was first City National Bank, and it was founded in 1812 and provided funding to a war in the US in 1812. We have 200,000 employees. We operate in 100+ countries and territories. And if I think about cross-border remote work as one of the things that employees are looking for with flexibility, the word that comes to mind in the pandemic is that it's been all-consuming. I think that's one word. It has a hyphen in the middle, but it's really taken up a lot of our time. And I'll just give you a brief history and tell you what we've done. Perhaps it was first very apparent in mobility programs because we were very close to assignees and we hear from them, you know, real time about what their plans are and what they're doing. So it really started in the mobility team, but we were very much aware that people were leaving when we went to all remote, which as the pandemic moved around the globe, most of our locations in the mid-March timeframe had gone to all remote work. And we understand that employees think that as long as you have Wi-Fi, you can do the work and it doesn't matter where you are. So understandably, people went to places where they could find childcare or where they could care for someone, where they felt safer. And at the time, everything was thought to be temporary, but because we are mobility professionals, we understand that there are risks. And we are a very heavily regulated industry in banking. And so there were risks to the employees, but there were obviously risks to the franchise, to the business. So we conducted a 40,000 person manager survey. Those are our people managers around the world. And we asked them to tell us who on your team has left the country that you're aware of. And we went out to those employees. We got about 1,000. We went out to them and we said, here are the risks to you. You may not have health insurance. You may be liable for income tax. It's just, we don't know. And at the time, again, it was thought to be temporary. And then as time clicked along, the risks obviously become greater. We did ask people to come back after the summer months and more people went out. We've been tracking them. And in September, we put a program in place where you formally have to ask for permission. And I'm happy to tell you more about that. But cross-border remote work, if people work for a global company, like many of ours, there's just an expectation that it's going to be okay. You know, well, there is a, city is in that country. What's the problem? So lots of questions like that.
It sounds like quite a challenge and quite a population to manage and keep track of. So kudos to your team. Mike, I'd like to pose the same question to you and Boeing. And can you share with us your thoughts? And if you'd like me to re-ask the question, I'd be happy to.
Oh, no, that's okay. Thank you. I would echo a lot of what Kathy said. It's, we have a very large employee population, 140-some thousand employees globally. And, a lot of the same issues, people looked to the mobility group first for guidance around how we were going to manage people that were crossing borders. And again, a lot of people do. They just think, okay, I have Wi-Fi, I have a place to stay, I can work anywhere. And what we have had to do is a pretty big education campaign to help people understand, again, a lot of the things that Kathy mentioned around the tax implications, the work authorization that you have to be long-term wherever you're going to be, especially. And then also helping our business leaders understand the implications of that as well, and the risk that can create for the company, and how we were going to mitigate that risk. Overall, we currently have a policy that does not allow cross-border working. So we have been able to point back to that pretty strongly to say, we do have a policy that says you can't do that. And but I will say we do also have a number of panels that we are working these issues as they arise, and it's a growing population. We're finding a lot of people, who, very innocently are going out and doing this for very legitimate reasons. But as they are learning what the implications are, we're having to pull them back and say, okay, you really need to come back to your base work location, and informing managers that if they're going to have a population or allow an employee to do that, they need to be willing to take on the cost risk associated with that as well. So, a lot of the same sort of ideas that Kathy mentioned, just, trying to get our hands around it. It's a huge population. And again, people think they can can do it, and we're even dealing with it. You know, it's not necessarily even cross-border country-wise, but state to state, even where it creates the tax liabilities and stuff as well that people don't fully understand. So, you know, we're getting on even a more macro level like that to look at it. So
yeah, absolutely. Really well put, Mike. Thank you. I wanted to ask both of you, actually, as senior leaders, what is your view on the future of cross-border collaboration and global mobility within multinational corporations? Is that something you can weigh in on? We'll start with Mike, since we'll continue with you, and then we'll move over to Kathy.
Okay, great. Absolutely. So, you know, again, you know, the collaboration with global mobility from our, you know, all of our business units has been really key, because we, of course, have that knowledge already for our assignee populations about, you know, how the cross-border, what the implications are associated with that, from the immigration, the tax standpoint, from, you know, the personal tax liability for individuals, but also the corporate tax piece that comes along with that. And so, you know, I think in the future, we're going to play a very large role in helping design those policies, making sure that we are managing the risks associated with that. I think that, you know, because we have that expertise in the future, they're going to look to us as a group to help manage that, to help to, you know, design and drive those policies that we're going to use to manage that. And I do think, you know, there's the expectation from our employees. We are a global company, and we you know, very much push that we're a global company. So we want to enable employees to be able to do it. So I think, you know, the collaboration between global mobility and our business units, with the, you know, benefit delivery around that, that idea that you can work anywhere and how we manage that, we're going to be a key player in that, definitely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In fact, I'm working with some companies today that have really focused on personal moves and support from an immigration and tax, albeit very, very lean, but at least they're recognizing not just company or business requested transfers, but personal transfers as well. And I think there's going to be more of that in 2021 and beyond. So thank you. And Kathy, can you share your thoughts on this as well?
Sure. I mean, as I said earlier, I think, and again, Mike and I both work for these huge global companies, and it is an expectation, right? And people, we know, particularly with our campus hires, that one of the reasons we're at high on the list is because we offer the opportunity to work in, you know, one of 100 places, right? So it is absolutely something that's critical for our talent. And I think one of the things that's come of this pandemic is a much heightened awareness of how diverse the workforce is, in fact. And so, to Andy's earlier comment about xenophobia and all of those things, you know, we employ tons and tons of foreign nationals in every location, and that's become very apparent, I think, to most people. We were at the center of pulling together the subject matter experts, as Mike said. These are the people we work with all the time, and we're both in very regulated industries, so our managers are very tuned into risk. And we will be very much front and center in the conversations about this future of work. And as one of my colleagues who's been working on this pandemic-related issue with me said, the future is now, because people want to understand, you know, what we're going to do tomorrow about this. So there's really some urgency around it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I'm going to switch over to Lindsay now. Lindsay, from your perspective, how does this leave global mobility teams in your view? And, you know, and from your perspective, what needs to change? And three-part question, so forgive me, but you do know this. How do you foresee the strategic value of global mobility teams from this point on, given some of these pivots?
Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for having me today. So along with what Kathy and Mike said, the company that I used to work for was an international bank, and I felt that during the middle of that pandemic, I had a fairly good seat at the table, but it was kind of that one level down. So I wasn't really dancing in front of the chief HR officer. I was that one level down, and it really did bring me and my team to the forefront of we can help you solve some of the problems you have. So I think, along with what Mike said, education is going to be key, and understanding what is happening with the panels for COVID, for this pandemic, because I know from my team, we were very involved at the get-go, and then there was a branch off and we weren't really invited to the party while they were solutioning. So I would make sure that you are very aware of, you know, what those panels look like. Are you able to interject? So can you work with the business partners? Can you get in front of the chief HR officer? And where is their drive coming from? So from financial services, could it be that you have big pockets of immigration individuals, maybe in, for example, methodology, where it's heavy on the immigration? Can you help with the strategy on how you're going to keep those individuals? Is it budget cuts? Is it something that you can work with your finance team and see whether or not there's strategy that you can help with there? So it really is finding the education where you can interject yourself and then continue to be a seat at the table. And I think it's going to be a two-horse race. For me, I've been writing some articles to help mobility professionals. We are problem solvers. We love to solve problems, but this one is a big one. And I think where I foresee us going is it really could be a two-horse race. If you have the Western world that really can work anywhere, could we be going back to the 80s and trying to incentivize people to go because people don't want to move anymore? Or are we still going to be dealing with, you know, people coming out of India, Asia, they're expecting to come and work internationally, and we're going to be able to design programs to help encourage those individuals to join global companies. So I think it's education. I think it's interjecting, making sure that you're part of the teams and really having plan A, B, C, D so that you can flex quickly depending on which direction your company goes.
Right. No, I agree. And I do think that as global mobility leaders, we are pivoting right now. We are thinking about different ways we can provide value, be strategic, keep that seat. So you bring up some really great points. Andy, I believe we had at least one question come in. Do you want to pose the question?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was one question, but there was actually two parts to it. So, and unfortunately, Michael and Catherine, you're being picked on here. So I'll give you a shot each. I'll maybe start with you, Michael. So the first part is, you mentioned employee benefits aligning with those requests for international mobility. Around duty of care, how will you deal with the added complications or costs in relating to that coverage? So extra benefits related to duty of care leads to extra costs. How will you deal with those costs? And I guess what it's coming from is, you know, are those truly a benefit? Are they compensation for the individual? So they're sort of invisible to the individual, but they are a cost. How will your company deal with that kind of thing?
Well, you know, I would say, first, those are very good questions. Honestly, those are the same questions we are currently asking and trying to answer. You know, it depends largely on where somebody sits within the organization, you know, versus, you know, some of our businesses are more willing to help cover costs and you know, deliver benefits versus others that are more lean. So I have to be very, very candid. We probably don't have exact answers to all of that yet. That's a lot of what we're still trying to work through. It's something that there's not one answer. What we're finding is there's not one answer that fits everything. And so we're probably going to end up with sort of a, you know, a hyphenated version of a lot of this, depending on location, business unit, you know, function, just a lot of different things associated with that. So I don't know if I'm getting to an answer. I honestly, I don't have probably a direct answer because I don't know that we have the answer yet either, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, as you're talking and as Lindsay was making her point about back to the 80s and incentivizing and using GM programs as a sort of reward tool. I work, so my day job is with GE, and it's a part of GE that we deploy people, engineers. And you might almost get to the point where what are traditional locations where you might not have had to give allowances and hardship allowances, suddenly post-COVID, even moving around is a hardship for people and a risk, like, you know,
Right.
intra-region. So suddenly you start revisiting all of these concepts that were retired a long time ago and discredited, and they were going full circle. It's an interesting time.
Well, it is. And I know from our perspective, you know, one of the approaches that I think we're finding we have to take is, you know, people do, you know, an assignment now may require more incentivization to get somebody to actually agree to go, and particularly to take their families. Because we've, I think, shown that a lot of these things can be done remotely, which, you know, now sometimes, you know, begs the question, do I really need to take my family and live halfway around the world in a location that's not necessarily ideal, but also because of the safety aspect of it. You know, a lot of people are looking at it, and we're looking at it from a safety perspective as well. You know, making sure we want our employees to be safe, and we don't want to put them or their family in any sort of harm's way. And it is something where I think we are seeing more, I wouldn't say pushback, but we are seeing more concern from our employee population about taking assignments. And so to Lindsay's point, I think, you know, we very well may find ourselves in a position that we go back to more of a traditional, you know, mindset or culture of, you know, what's in it for me to take an assignment? How am I going to benefit from this? It's not just what it does for me from a personal standpoint anymore, but, you know, how is the company going to do this because the company needs me there? So you're going to have to incentivize. So yeah, I would think that's something I think that's definitely on our horizon.
And Mike, I was just going to add, I think this is, you know, we've got, you know, mobility people on this call trying to be ahead of a problem. And for those of us that have been in it for years, and I know, Liz, I also joined when I was 8 years old as well. I think the horror of saying to heads of HR and cost that we may be going back would be terrifying for them, for those of them that have been aware of what expats used to cost. But I do feel that mobility people should be having these conversations, coming up with, you know, have you thought about this? Is this something that, you should be thinking about in terms of your budgets? Depends on how your budgets are aligned. But it's definitely start having those conversations, and then you'll get a gauge from where your company really feels like it's going to be positioned. But start having those conversations now. Don't wait till budgets have been set, and then, you know, then you've got to try and help the business with that incentivization.
Yeah, brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kath, I think you're muted, Catherine, Kath Thompson.
No wonder. Yes, sorry about that. I just wanted to add, you know, in the earlier question, which was about duty of care and when people move, you know, if we're talking about cross-border remote work, or, you know, if it's going to be, you know, for an extended period of time that you can work from anywhere, I think one of the principles that we have laid out at Citi is this notion that we're better together. We work in an apprenticeship model. And, you know, this notion that you come to a company because it has a certain culture. And so this technology spree where you can go work from anywhere, just plug in, you're good to go. You know, we recognize there's a place for that, but we're not endorsing it. So that's a messaging piece in our company. And as for duty of care, I think if someone chooses to be somewhere else, obviously that's a whole host of HR problems. How should they be paid? How do you payroll them? Healthcare. You know, there's a mutuality in that. And so I don't expect that those kinds of things will see increased cost, because the employee is asking for something that is exceptional, and it will become more framed out and more normal. But things like healthcare, those vary so widely from country to country that, you know, maybe there's an allowance and it's whatever it is, you know, those kinds of things. And, I mean, if it really does come to fruition, those of us who have this huge global footprint will really be at an advantage. And it has, frankly, advantaged us because we do have legal presence in so many places, which has advantaged us. So anyway, that was that question about duty of care.
Brilliant. So there was a second question, which I'll direct at you again, Kathy. So this is a brilliant question. At what stage do salaries have to be looked at in terms of location? If someone from a high salary area relocates to a lower salary area by choice, how do companies broach that? And I guess there's a second part to that, which is the opposite route. You know, I'm a German based in the UK and I've relocated back to Germany. Will you take my salary back up the way?
Yeah, so yeah, no, it's an excellent question. And I think one of the things about this pandemic, and we've seen it in, different publications where there was at the beginning, just as, we've all experienced, there was a sense it would be temporary. There was a sense of leniency and forgiveness. And, here in the United States, states have been fighting about who's getting taxed for what. And we're starting to see it happen in countries. Australia's come out with a statement about payroll tax for people working there. It's going to shift. It's inevitable. It is going to shift, and governments are going to get much more aggressive about it because they need tax revenue to recover. And they're not going to go after the employee, they're going to go after the employer because that's easier. So we all have to be just vigilant with our colleagues about watching it because it's not clear when that's going to happen. But I think, again, it's your risk appetite. If you're underpaying somebody in a country with minimum wage laws, that probably was fine in June, July, whatever. It's probably less fine now. It's probably pretty problematic now that we're moving into potentially another year. So that's a risk analysis. And that's also a challenge to having people work from anywhere, right? Because you don't have salary ranges for Kosovo, or maybe you do, but we don't.
Yeah. No, we don't. But I think the thing for me as a reward guy, first and foremost, which is my area of specialism, you start getting into this, what is the value of work? So, let's just say, for example, I've heard the saying said, be careful going for remote working because you will prove that your job can be done from anywhere. And that anywhere could be, without offending anyone, it could be a low-cost location, India, Eastern Europe. But here's the other side of it. Talented individuals might be a greater premium than ever. People that can do the magical stuff, the magical skills. So suddenly, that very skilled person in the low-cost location has scarce skills, and suddenly they become a premium at a global rate. This is the exciting prospect ahead of us and reward, where I think models and ways of working will alter quite radically. Okay.
Andy, we do have a few additional questions, but I'm wondering if we should continue with the panelists and then touch on the questions in the chat after you go through the next series of questions.
Yes, let's do that. And let's just, for your information, some of the questions are going into the chat and some of our questions are going into the question part. So
yes, I've got the Q&A up on one screen and we can address those three next. I think there was one more around global staffing, which was really for all panelists, which we can pose again after we go through the next round of questions. I can certainly put that with the other three.
Okay.
Great.
That works. Okay, so moving on to the rest of the panel, this question is for Sonia. So sticking with talent programs, with the growing voices and discontent on social justice and equality issues worldwide, how can one juggle so many demands on time and budget? What is the EY take on the future of GM and global working in amongst all of those important things?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Andy, and happy to be here this morning and this evening, wherever you're calling in from. I want to address, let's level set the conversation in the definition of diversity. Most often, individuals think of diversity from an ethnic, gender point of view and sexual orientation, things of that nature, which is all true. But in a case of this, thinking about new ways of working, returning to work and being global in a sense, we can expand that definition to think about flexibility, right? Things that we have to be flexible in our benefits. What does inclusion mean to your organization, and how does that apply to your employee? As we saw in this year, and especially in the US, the unrest, the racial unrest, and what does it mean for organizations, and what are we seeing in the market? I heard that Liz stated that, the D&I strategy are going away, but there's actually a bigger surge of it in the market because companies are now starting to put out public statements in regards to, we're an inclusive environment, we stand against racism, and what does that mean? So moving beyond just that public statement, what does it mean for your workforce and your organization? And how are you driving inclusion in ways of working, flexibility, and things of that nature? And so organizations are starting to think about, because consumers are concerned about how they're spending their dollars. Are they looking to organizations who are inclusive in nature, how they responded to their employees in the response to COVID-19? And what matters to your employees matters to your consumer. And sometimes we forget that disconnect, if you will, that most often that our workforce have lives outside. And so what is the social response? Is that the business world is now at a watershed moment. At one point it was about the kumbaya, but now diversity is about being strategic. It's about driving inclusion and ways of working and making sure that leveraging your employees to mirror the voice of your consumers in your marketing campaigns, in your community efforts, how you drive by recruiting from different places in the world, making sure you understand communication, promotion, retention. D&I hits every part of the employee life cycle. And so as you think about it and move forward today, in the context of mobility, the flexibility of working, addressing the xenophobia, how do I drive inclusion as I move not just from the quantitative who's in the organization, but the qualitative about the employee experience, as well as thinking about your consumers as well.
Brilliant. That's an amazing answer. Just moving on to my next question. So really building on what Sonia shared, I'm going to go to Patricia and ask you to give some perspective from the vendor position. So how has your business evolved to that normal, both the post-COVID normal, but also the workforce diversity and inclusion normal? I guess the next question for you to think about in your answer is, what is your take on priorities when developing mixed leadership in your own business? For example, I mean, we do know that you take great pride in being a primarily female-led business. So I'll pause, Patricia. What's your view on that topic?
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate being part of this great panel. As a woman-owned organization, diversity and inclusion are the foundation of our existence. So with the social problems and the COVID issues that have come back, it did have us reflect back onto what is our makeup. So we went and did an in-house poll, and turned out that 69% of our employees and 30% of our executive team are minority or women, including our CFO and the vice president of our human resources department. We think that it pretty much happened naturally. We didn't really work at it. It's just choosing the right people for the right position and having the right mentality internally for hiring purposes. And it's certainly something that we're going to continue to do.
Excellent. And there is something about it's a trade-off, because interventions are required, very forceful interventions, but sometimes things can shape very naturally as well. I guess your company, without leading too obviously towards being all female, it just kind of maybe happened, and that it's how you balance that. Because I think there's some value in things happening naturally versus kind of forced interventions, albeit we're at a point where certain interventions have had to happen.
Right. Yeah. Very, very true. Very true. We were very fortunate, I think, within an organization that we're open-minded enough to have progressed without having to really concentrate too much on it and just let it go, let it be. And obviously it's happened naturally, but it's something now that our eyes are open to more to it, that we're going to be even more careful going forward.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess a question for you, Lindsay, and it's probably targeted at the whole sort of vendor population. As an in-house practitioner primarily, what would you expect from the vendor population, the vendor group, in terms of kind of, as you're pushing ahead with your diversity and inclusion agenda, how do you expect that to be mirrored in the other side, so to speak?
Are you talking about in-house?
So you're sitting in-house, and you've got your kind of organizational requirements evolving in that space, and then you're beginning to talk to vendors and suppliers. What are your expectations of them in that same space?
I mean, I think, you know, from my last company, there was, you know, I had a dual role as head of mobility and head of D&I. There was a lot of emphasis to make sure that our vendors, you know, were going through, you know, the way that they picked their suppliers, where they picked their, you know, anything, that they were going through the same almost regiments that we were. So, you know, it's, you know, any partner needs to look and act like you. And so, you know, we put a lot of pressure on our partners to make sure that they were diverse and inclusive as well. I think in terms of mobility, I think one of the challenges that we see in mobility is just making sure that it's not a tap on the shoulder, like, you know, use this one, or, you know, I've got a connection here. And that can even go with an individual moving. So as mobility, you know, we have to embed the D&I culture to make sure that, you know, everything that we touch is really under that D&I regiment, to make sure that you're bringing difference and value through the systems that you have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it ties in a bit to what Sonia was saying as well about, you know, your organization reflecting your customers. It's another kind of version of that. I guess to ping it back to Patricia, you know, we hold you up, I guess, as a sort of leading organization in this space. So what are the big questions that you think RMCs and relocation service providers should be asking themselves in order to get ahead and in order to reflect accurately the kind of stuff that Lindsay's talked about today?
Well, just to touch back on what Sonia and Lindsay both were saying, is I think it's not just who we're hiring, it's who we're moving. And right now we're moving 4 different generations of people, and they all have different needs and all have different wants. And we have to try, our company as a service provider, have to meet those needs. So by listening to them and getting our customer service team to listen to them, and then reinforcing that each person is being treated as an individual. And we like to say that our motto is one size fits one. So each person that we move is treated as one individual, because again, 4 different generations of people is a huge, you know, it's a huge challenge now, because it's just a big mix of people's requests and what they want and what's right for them. As far as the RMCs are concerned, it's with the future of relocation and unknown activity for moves, RMCs might want to ask themselves, how relevant am I? What products do we have to offer that align and support the changing needs? For example, do we have solutions to help organizations recruit and retain an inclusive team that is willing to be mobile? Do we have solutions to support a virtual expatriate experience? And specific to their own employment composition, do we have sufficient diversity to drive creative thought and solutions to adapt, grow, and support social change that's taking place globally? I think those would be my my questions. And that, you know, it's not just questions for the RMCs, it's questions for all of us.
Yeah, brilliant. So true. Liz, I guess at this stage we're running over slightly, which is okay, but I wondered if you could pick 1 or maybe 2 questions from the Q&A and maybe pose them to the panel.
Yeah, sure. I think one which might be a little bit of a long answer, but this is pointed to Kathy. Kathy mentioned putting in place a temporary global remote worker policy this month. Can you please speak to the parameters? How long a period of time is it authorized? Does the employee need to obtain or confirm their right to work in a specific country? And do you only allow this, which is a great question, and I actually was thinking the same thing, do you only allow it in countries where a city has an entity? So if you can, if you're comfortable with those questions, Kathy, I think this is a good question for you.
Yeah, sure. We put something together very, very quickly, and we introduced it in September. So we had asked people to come back to the workplaces in most of our locations. As you know, Asia opened up again, the offices were open, all of that. But for the entire workforce, we offered 14 days only. So it's not like, 2 months on a Greek island. And it's, and because we did it quickly, we used our employee survey tool, which is something you can deploy very quickly. And in fact, yes, you do have to attest to the fact that you have the right to work. You put in your 14-day date range, and you are required to use your own personal time with it. You just don't get the 14 days, right? So, and that was addressing another issue, which is that people weren't using their time, and we can only carry over so much into the next calendar year. So it was also meant to address that. So that's in place. We just extended it into the first quarter. It was set to expire at the end of the year, but obviously we still have, and 14 days was very deliberate. It was meant to match the quarantine periods, because again, our risk folks were saying, if we have to defend this, it's a very short period of time. It is clearly pandemic related. We have a case that we can make. So that was another piece of education, right? Why is it 14 days? So anyway, that's there. And then to your question about non-presence countries, we have that fast track system for people who attest to the fact that they can work in that country under penalty of discipline, which could lead to firing if there's, if that's not truthful. And the manager has to agree to it and approve the time away. So those two employees, and so we call that fast track. If you're going to a non-presence country, or if you have a regulated or licensed role, you come off the fast track. You can't be there. And so this risk review group looks at it. And so we've looked at some non-presence countries. We've assessed the risk with our corporate tax people and the facts about the person. But our bottom line is you can't do it if you don't have the right to work. So if someone is from one of the non-presence countries and they have the right to work there, it might be possible. But if we can't, be sure that the person has the right to work there, we don't allow it. We turn it down.
Makes sense. Makes sense. One more question, Andy. You think we have time for? I think we have time for one more. Do you agree?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay. So this question came in right at the beginning, so I want to pose it. And the question is, what do you think the enduring effects on global staffing will be? Will global roles be viewed differently? And I would pose that probably either to Lindsay, Kathy, or Sonia. Or Mike, any of you. Would any of you like to take that? So what do you think the enduring effects on global staffing will be, as well as global roles? Will they be viewed differently with this new cadence?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. I think if we're talking about global roles, the roles for global oversight, I think, become more important. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about mobile people, I think people will entertain different options. And as I said, your company's message, your company's culture, how much of remote work can you tolerate? I think there'll be a desire on the employee side for more of it, but I'm not sure exactly what was meant by global roles, but I think one of the things that's become very clear is that you need to really manage this. You have to have people looking around the globe who gather from more local sources, but really have a view of what's happening, a bird's eye view.
That makes sense.
And I agree with Kathy. I think we've kind of catapulted ourselves into, having to look holistically across the board. I don't think, just someone that's lived in many different countries, I don't think you're going to ever get away from companies wanting to embed you in a culture, and that culture, you know, can be, you know, a physical culture. You know, some countries, when you go work, they really do want to eyeball you. They want to build that relationship in person. So my personal opinion is, once we get the world vaccinated, we start moving, I don't think it's going to change the fact that either, you know, younger people are really going to want to have that international experience, or companies are wanting to embed a culture to you know, expand people's knowledge and breadth, to make them better employees. And I don't think that's going to go away. In fact, you know, it could become even stronger after this pandemic.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, great. Well, listen, panel, amazing contribution. I'll be recapping in some of that at the end of the session, but at this point, I shall gracefully move over to Ben and Liz, who are going to do a bit of a fun bit of interaction. Stay tuned, it's straightforward, but it's very interesting. So, Ben, are you ready to take the lead?
Yes. Hi.
Great.
Hi and welcome. I'm really excited and happy because Kathy actually moderated the next part when she said the future of work is now. So this is where we are. We're on the future of work. And what I would like to do with you the next 15 minutes or so, I would like to invite you to join me to do a mural. That is a digital whiteboard. So in a few seconds, I'm going to share my screen and going to talk you through it, and then I'm gonna have Ken in a couple of minutes to share a link with you, and then you can, using this link, completely anonymously join this mural and participate in the live exercise. So you should be on my screen now. So this is what you're gonna see when you join the link in a minute, and there's going to be 3 exercises. So the first exercise is a simple prioritization exercise. So there's different dots and different points, and what I would like you to do is grab one of these dots with your mouse and then release it on any of these fields that you believe represented. So the green dot is your top priority. The slightly less greener dot is the runner up, so your second most priority, and the red dot is the least important of these topics for you in the foreseeable future. So we look at cost savings, cross-border compliance, diversity management, GM sustainability, job security, mental well-being, strategic GM, and talent development. What's going to happen is you're all going to be doing this at the same time, and then we have a sort of clustering. So when you're done with your first most important thing, you take the second one, and I'm doing this randomly right now, so and you put it like anywhere you want it, and then you're done with it. In terms of using the mural, so this is a digital whiteboard that you can use this little navigation here to hop around, although it makes a lot of sense to follow me here. There's a brief outline. So when you start on exercise 1, we do it, I allocate 2 minutes, then we move to the next one and the next one, and I have a little feature where I can get all your attention to be on the same page. But in general, this is, you can zoom out, you can zoom in like as close as you want. So this is like really a whiteboard, as if we're standing in front of it in the same room at the same time, and you can use it. So I'm going to put back my dots real quick to not bias the result. And when we're done with this exercise, we're going to move to exercise 2. And this is something we need to write a little bit. So if we imagine that global mobility is basically an aircraft, there's a bunch of questions we can ask ourselves, like where are we coming from? Who do we deliver value to? What gives us the power? How do we steer? But the question I would like to briefly answer today is, where are we going? Where is global mobility going? And in order to give this answer, all you need to do is double click in here, and there's a little sticky note coming in, and then you can just answer your text. You can drag it, drop it, There's a lot of these things appearing at the same time, and then you have answered that. And again, you don't need to register. You can put down your name. You don't have to. That's not an issue. And we're going to spend a couple minutes on that, and then we conclude with a final exercise. And this is a dream exercise, if you will. So we'd like to invite you to answer the following question. The question is also written down up here. If you had unlimited resources, money, time, staff, whatever, in your department, what would be your top goal and priority for global mobility in 2021? And again, you double click and type in your note. And if you have any questions at any point, just let me know. It's going to be a lot of people joining at the same time. You can use the text if you're unsure about something. And in terms of the navigation here, if you feel lost at some point, just ping me a note. Okay, now I would like Ken to post the link in the chat, please.
There you go. It's there now, Ben.
Gonna go away from my screen sharing. And now if everybody, panelists and attendees, click on this link. Yes, some already do. I can see you popping up. Get yourself familiar with the environment. Brilliant. Yeah, we got a lot of people in there already. Let's wait a little bit longer before I set the counter. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to start now. Please grab your dots and prioritize. Again, if you have any difficulties and questions, I'm here in the chat. Okay, I think time's almost up, but I can see patterns, so wonderful. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So we get back to this later. Now, if you join me and click on exercise 2, what I can do is, okay. So if you double click somewhere on the blackboard and just answer, where are we going? Where's global mobility heading? There's no right or wrong. This is your personal opinion. We're really interested in gathering all these different views and ideas you want to share with us. If you want to add multiple points that don't particularly relate, just add in multiple topics. It's great. Some people change the color of the sticky notes. Excellent. So visiting horse, I'm going to grab your post-it and put it on the blackboard, but thanks for the comment. Wonderful. Super. Okay, so let's see, most posts are in. Oh, there's more coming. Brilliant. So roughly 1 more minute. And again, there's no right or wrong. This is really share your thoughts, share your ideas, what you feel is relevant from your perspective, for your company, on the individual perspective, really anything you want to share. So we're approaching the end of this exercise, and finally, a couple more seconds. Okay, thank you so much. And now finally, I would like to invite you to go to exercise 3. Similar idea, click anywhere in the whiteboard, double click there, and now answer your dream question. So if you had unlimited resources, what would be your top goal or priority for global mobility in 2021? Very, very good points coming up. So we're approaching the end of this exercise. Yep. So time's up. I'm going to leave the link open for a little bit longer, but that means so if you want to follow the remainder of this discussion and our wonderful panelists, then just leave the mural link open and join later and complete whatever you wanted to write down there. And I'm going to hand over to Liz and Andy. Thank you so much.
Okay. I mean, Ben, I'll just briefly flip it back to you. Is it too early to draw any conclusions from that data? How does that work?
Yeah, what we're going to do is, I mean, the exercise one is rather straightforward. So we see the pattern here already. So we're going to certainly look deeper into cost saving. That's a big issue for many participants, cross-border compliance as well, and so on. So we're going to do some sort of analysis of that, and in the next step we're going to get into the analysis of the text boxes, and I'm going to communicate to you via the rest channels. So it's going to be on the website, social media, and so on, email communication. So we will certainly follow up on that in a condensed format.
Well, that's excellent. I mean, I think it's quite a nice segue, if I may, into effectively the end of the session that we're leading. And before Liz and I recap, I wanted to share with you all just some res updates. And so what we've just done there is a nice bridge into one of the main things that we do, which is our research and ongoing research. And so the first part of this update is just to say, our research continues. We had a paper out this week on kind of new ways of working given the current environment. And we have 5 more papers planned for the next 12 months, together with our supported partners, but very importantly with Ben Yu and also Michael Dickman, who hasn't said much today because we've not invited him to, but he's always such a valued part of the RES. So that's the first update in the RES forum. I think other stuff that I just wanted to quickly tell you about, we continue to expand our analytics tools. Those tools are great. They're online. You upload your data and then you get quick benchmarks and cuts versus your peer group. The great news is, and I can just maybe talk to this, Liz, given time, but we've developed a domestic relocation benchmark tool with Sterling Lexicon, which we're all very excited about. And that's for the US, but that can obviously be expanded globally into other domestic markets as appropriate. So look out for that. That's our analytic tools. We are also, what else have we got on? We just recently concluded a learning cohort for a client company, a 6-month course for 18 individuals covering 14 countries. And that was upskilling in GM. And that was what you call blended learning. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of reading, and an assessment at the end. So, I guess just an offer to our membership, both in-house and externally. That's a great program. It's very interactive and the opportunities there for you if you're interested in hearing more about that. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about on the RES is the RES Forum Strategic Advisory Board. This is a very tight-knit, unashamedly a bit of a clique. We've got 7 or 8 thought leaders, really senior heads of mobility in there. And we're really trying to shape the GM agenda at a very strategic level. So, I'd really encourage you, if you're interested in that level of discussion, to drop us an email and we can talk about how we might involve you. But it's a very small group intentionally. We've currently got like 7 member companies and we'll have a limit on how many we can invite. But it's already achieving some great things and beginning to create some really great thought leadership for the GM community. So that was the RES update in a nutshell. Before we wrap up, we're obviously finishing up at 5:15 and it's 10 past. So I thought what I would do first is give you my final thoughts. In fact, I'll do it differently. I'll ask Liz if you could share your thoughts, then I'll give mine, and then we can wrap up the session. So Liz, any thoughts and insights that you want to share about today and what you've learned and what we can share back with the group?
Yeah, no, I think the first is just our companies, each of us recognizing the thoughtfulness and planning and work involved with ensuring compliance, ensuring adherence to company policy, and how critically important it is to know where all of our team members are across the globe, what they're doing, where they're doing it, are they posing a risk to themselves or the company? And when you're talking about, identifying, in Kathy's case, 1,000 individuals that were working remotely cross-border. That's a lot. That's a lot to manage. It's a whole layer on top of our typical work in our space. So that to me is critical. And then of course, what Sonia was talking about, flexibility, understanding diversity within an organization, what the company values are, what the diversity goals are, where they are in terms of meeting and growing from a diversity perspective. I do think, while I read things all the time about where budgets will be cut, I completely agree that this is not an area to cut. And I really enjoyed hearing Sonia's answers. So those were my 2 key takeaways today.
Yeah, great, excellent, and thank you so much from me sharing this meeting. It went very well. From my point of view, I had sort of 3 or 4 bullets. What interested me, what jumped out, was the need for risk management and compliance. Glad to hear that. Glad to hear we can add value. My provocative question for us all, though, is let's not hide behind risk management. Let's not become compliance experts. And I always come back to a model we developed in the Reds, the SAFE model that Michael created. And it talked about the kind of spaces we can play in. And whilst compliance and technical expertise is one, also, strategic insight, talent jockey, talent management, operational excellence, really integrating into the broader people agenda is important. So great that we've got our seat at the table and that door has been open because we're experts, but let's not hide behind it. The other thing was, and it's really a nod to Lindsay Stiff Hair, the sort of back to the 80s, back to the future, thinking of the movie Tootsie as I'm watching that, but honestly going back to the 80s and revisiting models that we thought were retired and long gone, and suddenly they're relevant again, incentivizing people to be mobile and incentivizing people to develop in their careers. But we could be in that place. And then the final thing I heard, which I think Liz, you mentioned, was cost management being so important, and yet having to throw money at the situation as well. It's that kind of weird paradox that we're always boxed into. So that was it from me. I would like to thank the panelists very much for their contribution. Great job. I'd like to thank Liz as well for co-hosting it. Ben, that technology session was outstanding. How you made it happen. Who'd have thought a year ago that we could do all this stuff remotely and so successfully, and yet here we are. So I want to wish you all a very happy holiday. Thank you for your contribution. And I look forward to working you all and seeing you all in Res Live 6. All the very best.